Okay, Venerable members of the Mahasangha, dear friends in Dhamma, whoever is watching us in YouTube and Facebook, welcome to our bi-weekly sutra discussion with all the Venerable monks and nuns from Canada, USA, Europe, and also from Australia. Let us begin this sutra discussion by paying respect and homage to the Buddha. So let us recite Namo Tassa 3 times together. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. I pay my respect and homage to him, the Blessed One, the Worthy One, the fully enlightened Buddha. So today, it gives us a great joy and pleasure to have the gatherings of the Sangha members from different countries and different regions, different time zones. For past 2 months, we had a very productive sutra discussion during COVID-19. And this sutra discussion with the Venerable monks and nuns is actually growing week by week. More Venerable monks and nuns are showing great interest in joining this unique discussion. And so as a result of that, we had this great idea to have some great monks with us to have more productive and meaningful sutra discussions. So as I was talking to some of our Venerable colleagues, and they were very happy for this and this idea. And when I mentioned about the most Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi, almost all of you were so pleased. And I said, let me try to first get hold of him. And I called the Chuangyan Monastery 2 times. And then I was told Bhante Bodhi was on a personal retreat. And I was asked to wait till end of March. And so then one of Bhante Bodhi's students from Toronto told me that he was conducting the Satipatthana meditation retreat. And she gave me the email address, and I sent an email to Bhante Bodhi, and within 2 days, I received a reply from him, which made my day. and I was very happy to receive that reply from him. And what he said was actually made me very happy, because I knew Bhante Bodhi actually I met him in 1980s. Then I was a teen monk in Kandy, Sri Lanka, and at few occasions we met him at his monastery, and also at few occasions when Bhante Bodhi visited Ayya Nyanasiri, another American nun, together with the most venerable Piyadasi Mahatero. And of course, both of you actually paid a visit to the venerable monks at Vajirarame, and we had the opportunity to offer Gilampasa to you, Bhante Bodhi. And it was so nice to see that you still remember me by my name. And so we all have high respect for you, Bhante, and we knew those days, and also now we know what you're doing. And to have a monk like you among us to have this discussion will definitely give us this motivation, great motivation, and more inspiration to practice the Dhamma, to read the sutras, and also to get going with our monastic life in the Western world. And we are also watching what you're doing, Bhante Bodhi, and we are so inspired. And so when you accepted my invitation, I have informed to all the venerable colleagues, and they were so delighted with this news. And so now we are having you among us, and so we would like to welcome you, Bhante Bodhi. We are very, very joyful heart. Thank you, Bhante. So, dear venerable members of the Mahasangha, dear friends of Dhamma who are watching us on YouTube and Facebook, and all of you know who Bhikku Bodhi is, and but I would like to say a few words about him. The Most Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi is an American Buddhist monk from New York City, born in Brooklyn, New York in 1944. He obtained a BA in philosophy from Brooklyn College and a PhD in philosophy from Claremont Graduate School. That was in 1972, the year I was born. And drawn to Buddhism in his early 20s, after completing his university studies, he traveled to Sri Lanka, where he received novice ordination in 1972 and full ordination in 1973, both under the late Venerable Ananda Maitreya Mahanayaka Mahatero, the leading Sri Lankan scholar monk of recent times. He was appointed editor of the Buddhist Publication Society in Sri Lanka in 1984 and its president in 1988. In May 2000, the Most Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi gave the keynote address at the United Nations on its first official celebration of Vesak, the day of the Buddha's birth, enlightenment, and passing away. He returned to the US in 2002. He currently resides at Chuangyan Monastery and teaches there and at Bodhi Monastery. He is currently the chairman of Ying Shun Foundation.
Yeah. Some of this is old information.
Okay.
I don't have any connection with Bodhi Monastery now, and I'm not involved with the Yin Shin Foundation anymore.
Okay, thank you, Bhante, for correcting me.
Yeah.
And also, Bhikkhu Bodhi is also the founder of organization Buddhist Global Relief, which funds projects to fight hunger and to empower women across the world. And this is not a false story. This is a true story. We are watching you, Bhante. And of course, Bhikkhu Bodhi has many important publications to his credit, either as author, translator, or editor. And To mention few, the discourse on the fruit of recluseship, the Middle Land discourses of the Buddha, great discourse on causation, numerical discourses of the Buddha, the connected discourses of the Buddha, Buddha and his Dhamma, the Noble Eightfold Path, the discourse on the all-embracing net of views, the numerical discourses of the Buddha, the comprehensive manual of Abhidhamma, in the Buddha's words, the Buddha's teachings on social and communal harmony, the discourse on the root of existence, the Sutta Nipata, an ancient collection of the Buddha's discourses, investigating the Dhamma, a collection of papers, Dhamma reflections, collected essays of Bhikkhu Bodhi, reading the Buddha's discourses in Pali, a practical guide to the language of the ancient Buddhist canon. So, Bhante Bodhi, you have done a great service, and we are very pleased with your service. And I always tell the people in my circle, and as Theravada Buddhist community, I think it is a great blessing to have you in the Theravada Buddhist tradition. And so today, we are actually going to discuss on various modern ethical issues, and these some are complicated issues, but we are going to try our best. And so before we ask some questions, Bhante Bodhi, would you like to say a few words?
Well, I'm very honored to receive this invitation. And I should just repeat that I had met when I was living with Venerable Nyanaponika at the Forest Hermitage in Kandy. There was an American Buddhist nun who was assisting us at the Buddhist Publication Society. Her name was Ayya Nyanasiri. Yeah. And she had moved to a little house at Primrose Gardens. And she said that she was across the street there was a branch of Vajrayana in Primrose Gardens. And she said that there was a young monk from Bangladesh who had heard about Venerable Nyanaponika and myself, and he wanted to come to visit us at the Forest Hermitage. And she used to come, I think it was every Tuesday morning to visit us. And so one Tuesday, so we said it was okay. And then she brought this, I think, 15-year-old. You said you were born 1972.
Yeah.
If you were 15, then you're sure you were born 1972? Because I think she said that you said that you were 15 years old. Okay. But Ayya Nyanasiri became a nun in 1987. Yeah. And I think she moved to Primrose Gardens in 1990, in which case you would have been you could have been 18 years old, and 17 or 18 years old. Yeah. So then later, many, many years later, somehow I saw through the grapevine that same monk, Venerable Saranapala, was now living in Canada and had become very, very popular all over the internet, engaged in so many Dhamma activities. So I think I sent him a message on Facebook. Are you the same young Samanera, at that time a Samanera, living at Primrose Gardens? And then he wrote back to confirm this and said, yes, he is. And so that's how the winds of karma sometimes blow us together in strange ways and separate us and then join us again many years later.
Yes, but even you were the motivation, inspiration to me personally those days. And so that's the karma that brought us together today. So
yeah, and then just to continue, when Venerable Saranapala invited me to join this conference call, he gave me sort of two choices. He said, you can give a talk on a sutta, or we could ask some controversial questions, ethical questions that people, especially lay people, are often asking us. And he gave me a choice, and I thought I could take the easy way out and just give a talk on a sutta. But I do that all the time. So it's less interesting to me. And so I thought I would take the other option of dealing with some of these knotty and controversial and challenging questions. But I want to say that in this program that we're going to do this evening, I don't want simply to be regarded as an authority who has the final answer on to these questions, but rather these should be topics or themes that I could give my point of view, and then maybe some of the more difficult ones we could discuss a little bit to see what kind of variety of perspectives there are on these issues. I just saw a note from Bhante Suttadhara, who I remember meeting many years ago in Kandy. I think it could have been at Tapovana.
Yeah.
You were living in Hawaii for some time.
Yes, Venerable. Yes.
Are you still in Hawaii or in Sri
No,
Lanka?
now I am in California.
In California.
Yeah, so thank you, Bhante Bodhi. And as Bhante Bodhi said, this is going to be a very friendly conversation. And when we ask questions, Bhante Bodhi is going to answer. But if any Venerable monk or nun would like to add something more, or even ask a question personally regarding that particular question or whatever he said, please feel free to unmute yourself and speak up. So our first question will be asked by Bhante Pemaratana. I think he's not here now. He's not here yet. And on his behalf, let me ask this question from you, Bhante Bodhi. He said, I would like to ask Bhikku Bodhi how Buddha's teachings can help us to understand and eventually to overcome the current divisiveness, racial discriminations, and suspicions among many groups of people in the US and elsewhere. So
this question is just so wide-ranging that to answer it with any degree of adequacy would almost be a lecture in itself. And here I would say the Buddhist teachings don't give us enough information to understand all of the specific aspects of what's described here as the current divisiveness, racial discriminations, and suspicions among many people, groups of people in the United States. But rather, I would use maybe some of the key principles of the Buddha's teaching to try to understand the more specific aspects of these conflicts and divisiveness. And I would say that perhaps the root of the divisiveness, and particularly of racial conflict and suspicion, and ethnic conflict and suspicion, using the lens of the Buddha's teaching, would be the role of the sense of identification. We have, usually the Buddhist teaching emphasizes the function of personal identification, identifying oneself with these five aggregates, with one's acquisitions, possessions, the different factors that enter into one's sense of personal identity. But to understand the kind of social conflicts that take place in the United States, the key factor, I would say, is understanding the dynamics of group identity, the way people base their sense of personal identity on belonging to a particular group, a racial group, an ethnic group, religious group. And because of that sense of identification, they see other people belonging to different groups with different identities as a threat to their own standing, their own security, their own position, particularly the position that they occupy within a silently but pretty precisely calibrated scale or level or layers of social identities, so that people, particularly people who are lower down on the social scale, will be afraid of other people lower down on the social scale, belonging to different racial groups, different ethnic identities, undermining their own standing in the society, their political voice, their social standing, and particularly, perhaps above all, their economic security. And so the key here, I would say, is a sense that the pie of goods that can be distributed in society is a limited size pie, and there are only so many slices in the pie, and other people or other groups are going to get bigger slices than our group gets, or they will get more slices than our group gets. And so part of I would say, the key to overcoming this divisiveness and discrimination, in a way, this is creating another polarity, but to see that the people in the lower strata of society, and even in the middle strata of society, have more in common with each other than they believe they do. And that the benefits of society with a more equitable economic system can be and a more just social system can be, or the economic benefits can be more widely distributed to establish and provide for the economic well-being and security of virtually everybody, and that the political voice can be also widely distributed so that people in different communities can contribute in a shared way to a truly democratic society. But what is happening is that there is a small group of very powerful, very wealthy people who are seeking to transform, to undermine the democratic structure of United States politics and transform it into an autocratic oligarchy in which a small group of people at the top, very wealthy people with a lot of clinging to their power and position, are pitting people lower down in the social scales against each other, creating conflict amongst them in order to secure their own position at the top, and to prevent the more marginalized and dispossessed groups from recognizing their common interests and uniting together to transform this oligarchic structure into a more economically just and more politically democratic form of governance.
So Venerable members of the Mahasangha, do you have anything else to add? Do you have any other questions with respect to what Bhante Bodhi said? Okay, so everyone is quiet. I think I think Bhante Bodhi, we have more questions. Maybe later on, I would like to ask the audience in Facebook and YouTube, and if you also have any questions to ask, please feel free to make the comments with your questions. If we have enough time, we will be asking a question from Bhante Bodhi. So our next question goes to Bhante Vijitha. I think from Ottawa, he's not here. On his behalf, Bhante Kusala from Detroit, USA, would like to ask that question from Bhante Bodhi.
My respect to Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi.
You are from the Harvard Divinity School.
Yes, we met. And Professor Hallisey was just talking about you on Thursday about the roots of your hunger relief project, which I will ask later. So I'm going to Bhante Vijitha's question. This will be a very interesting Dhamma discussion. Looking forward to this moment, especially MAiD, M-A-I-D, or medically assisted in dying, is a legalized process in Canada. Recently, a new amendment was made making it more available for people with chronic illness. Some religions are strictly against MAiD. This seems like a very timely discussion to explore Buddhist thoughts on modern ethical issues. I think euthanasia may be connected to this, and perhaps also other issues like abortion. So Venerable Bodhi can begin from wherever you wish.
Yeah, this of course, it's a very difficult issue for us to address, for me to address as a monk, because according to the stipulation of the Vinaya, the Parajika rule, if, say, somebody inquires from me, they say, I'm suffering from a very painful illness, I don't have long to live, and I have this option to, through medical means, to put an end to my life. Should I take that option? Then I can't recommend that option to them without being at risk of falling into a parajika and then losing my status as a bhikkhu. And so I will try to look at this question not from the kind of advice that I would give, but how do we assess this legalization of medically assisted dying from an ethical point of view? And here, I just simply cannot take a very fundamentalist stand regarding the ethics of Buddhism, because it seems that the ethical injunction against the taking of life is almost rooted in the premise that all, like we find these words in the Dhammapada, all beings love life, all beings are afraid of death, comparing oneself to others, one should not kill or encourage the taking of life. But I can well understand the situation of somebody who has an extremely painful, debilitating illness, no cure for that illness, perhaps no means to alleviate the pain. They're certain to die, say within a 6-month period. There's just no chance of reversing the illness. I could well understand and condone their decision to request the medical professionals to terminate their life. How this works out karmically, I just don't know. You know, if somebody, of course, kills a person who wants to go on living, we know that that's an extremely heavy karmic action. And in the Vinaya, the Parajika rule says, even if one encourages somebody who wants to die, he says, he feels fed up with life, he feels miserable. And I say, what is the purpose of you going on living? You're better off dying. And then that person kills themselves, then I incur the parajika. But in that case, we could say that this is a person who's in maybe a state of depression or dejection. And in that case, the proper approach for me is to try to cheer the person up and to encourage them to go on living, to offer them some positive perspective on their life. But in this case, the case that's being considered here, we have somebody with an oppressive, debilitating illness, which is going to deteriorate and increase the level of their pain. Of course, if there is adequate pain medication, then perhaps we would say that they should avail themselves of the pain medication and try to endure the pain with courage and determination, recognizing that the pain could be alleviated. and live out the normal lifespan until it comes to an end. So I don't want to make any categorical judgment in response to this question, but maybe somebody else has some ideas about this.
I want to also add that Venerable Vijitha and also myself, we visit patients in hospitals as spiritual care people. Venerable Vijitha does that in Ottawa in a hospital, and I have done it in Boston and here. In doing that, we see these patients who have made their own decision to go on with comfort measures only when they are, these are called CMO patients, comfort measures only.
These are called what?
CMO, comfort
CMO.
measures only.
Yeah.
So the acronym for that. And when we see that, we know that they don't need any assistance in their death, but which means they have told the doctors to pull the machine, and maybe they have, or their proxy, someone who makes decisions, and then may have made that decision. And we step out and we do see that, we question this thing all the time when we come across a situation like this. But we let it happen that it is the patient's decision, not our decision. And of course, it looks like Bhante just said, we need to be careful, be mindful on our Vinaya aspects, and also about the pain aspect that they are dealing with, because we can't lift that pain in the end. We can be compassionate on it. So just a little bit to add in there.
Yeah, but I would say that a distinction should be made between actually inducing death by injecting the patient with a substance that is going to terminate their life. Distinction between that and refusing, at the patient's request, refusing to give artificial life-sustaining, to take artificial life-sustaining measures, and heeding the patient's request not to be sustained on life-supporting machines over an extended period of time. In fact, I would make that request myself. Like if I'm in a coma and there's no chance of coming back to consciousness, I don't want my body to be sustained by machines. But if maybe I would say, let the body be supported maybe a week or 10 days. If it doesn't come back to life, let the machines go and let the body do what it has to. If it's going to come back to life, it'll come on its own. If the karma is for the life to end, it will end.
So Bhante Bodhi, does karma play a role in there, or whoever is making the decision?
Yeah, it's a tricky question. Okay, the patient requests, say the karma plays a role in which situation? Exactly which situation?
The patient doesn't want to go through the physical pain, and the patient is making the decision to go.
Okay, the patient is making the decision.
Bhante, can I rephrase that?
Yeah.
And ask it in a different way. We all understand the rules governing behind this when it comes to a monk's perspective.
Yeah.
But people who are choosing to get rid of their pain, and doctors would not usually ask. We are looking at a situation from a Buddhist perspective here that I understand. But why looking at it from a Buddhist point of view, would you be kindly able to explain to what extent the Buddhist suttas, let it be Vinaya or Sutta or Abhidhamma, give us to what extent do we have, what allowance do we have when it comes to free choice? I mean, one's own will. not governed by someone saying this is what the Buddha said, so we should not be intervening with one's life. Does the sutta give any idea about to what extent do we have rights for our own life and the choices that we make?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I quite grasp the question. Of course, the Buddha's teaching teaches that we have
free will,
something like free will, in that our choices, our decisions are not necessarily determined by the past, but in the present moment. Of course, they're limited by the conditions in which we find ourselves, by our habit formations, by our predispositions, and so forth. But under those limits, we have the ability to choose one way or another. In fact, the Buddha's entire ethical teaching is built upon that premise, that we can always choose to turn away from the unwholesome and turn towards the wholesome, that there's no predetermination.
Okay, thank you.
But we still have that previous question.
Question on karma, yes.
Yeah, so that was the question, so it was made more precise. What kind of karma the person who makes the decision to voluntarily undergo a medically induced death, do they acquire the karma of the same kind of karma that would be acquired by somebody who is feeling upset, disappointed, depressed, and then takes a gun and shoots themselves in the head? I don't think so, because karma is determined by, by volition. Mm-hmm. And in this case, the volition is, what feeds into the volition is a recognition that I'm afflicted with this terrible, extremely painful illness, which is incurable and which is going to continue to degenerate and become more and more severe. And so to escape that suffering, then I'm going to terminate my life. Of course, I have a person on the other side who now says, wait a minute, you take your life to escape the suffering you're presently undergoing. That means you're trying to escape your karma. And so you take your life, but the karma remains. And since it's still there, it's going to pop up once you pass on to your next life. It's going to pop up in some other form, and you're going to find yourself in the same situation again. And then you have to undergo that karma. And so the only way to exhaust the karma is to endure the pain and suffering until it comes, until your life comes to its natural end. Then you'll be hopefully finished with that karma and then ready to start over with a fresh slate, or for the next bundle of karma to mature. I'm not able to negotiate between the conflict in these two positions.
Yeah, but
so we could say that there are these two positions, and each one would have to judge for themselves which seems more reasonable and which is more acceptable under the circumstances.
Bhante, may I ask a question? So far, we've talked about the karma of the patient who's deciding to be euthanized, but we haven't yet talked about the karma of the doctor. And this actually worries me a lot, because the existing analogy is in veterinary care, where it's actually a standard practice to kill cats and dogs and other sentient beings when they're very sick or very old. And to me, this just seems like encouraging the doctor to do an extremely unwholesome act. So I just want your thoughts. Like, what's the karma of putting them in that position? Again, in veterinary medicine, they even say it's unethical to not kill the animals, which to me is completely backwards. So I'd like to know what your thoughts are about the karma of effectively pressuring doctors into killing their patients.
You know, I've known people, coming to the case of animals, people who have been very good, ethically observant Buddhists who have had pets, and they've said, if my pet gets really painfully ill, I'm not going to bring them to a vet in order to have their life terminated. I'm going to let them die a natural death. But then in the case of some of them, when their animal became very ill, they just had to say, I just could not endure seeing my pet undergoing such severe pain. So I brought the animal to the vet. And so in that case, you would say that the karma also applies not only, the negative karma applies not only to the vet, but also to the person, the Buddhist practitioner who brought their animal to the doctor. But the people that I have in mind told me afterwards that they felt completely clear in mind, no compunction or regret at all, that they felt that they had done the best thing. Okay, in the case of the doctor, again, this is an ambiguity that I just don't have the abhinya, the super knowledge to be able to resolve. But I would say certainly there's a distinction between, okay, this was a case that was brought up some years ago when Obamacare was coming out for negotiations. The Republicans were saying it's going to lead to these death panels where the grandmothers are going to be sent into the medical ward, and you've lived 80 years, you've had enough time, and the grandmothers are all going to be injected and put to sleep forever. But it seems it doesn't quite work like this with medically induced death, that of course the doctors are responsible for taking the life, but they do this under only extremely special conditions after all other options have been considered. So if we look, from very looking at the text very literally, certainly they're responsible for taking life and for taking a human life. But if you take the position that karma involves intention, and here the intention is not to deprive somebody of the life that they want to live, but to help people to pass away in a way that will help them preserve their dignity and to accede to their wish to pass away, then it seems to be a mitigating factor in relation to the karma. So even if the karma is definitely unwholesome, it seems, in my view, that it would not be as heavily unwholesome as that of a doctor who decides to inject a patient with the life-terminating illness because they've reached a certain age, and so they're no longer entitled to go on living.
Okay.
These are really complicated issues that I wish the Buddha were alive today to address this.
Hey, Bhante, I have some thoughts on that too, with respect to Bhikkhu Bodhi and the Bhantes. How complicated that situation would be in society, and especially in families. I have one experience in a family where there was a young couple actually. This girl actually called me when their dog was terminally ill, and the doctors decided to put this dog into sleep. But the girl, she has very much concern about these aspects, the karma and supporting euthanasia and stuff.
Yeah.
But the husband was totally against that, and he wanted to go with the doctor's decision.
Yeah.
So they could not get to a settlement, and they got eventually, almost they got into a divorce. That far it went. So in this way, actually, it can be so complicated as it comes to our practical level, to deal with that.
Yeah.
And also that reminds us, there were a couple of incidents, I think, even at the Buddhist time, a certain monk took his own life, right? And as you mentioned, Bhante, it was the intention, and we came to know that that monk attained enlightenment at the moment of his death, right? As you said, the intention here plays a major role.
That case, is that the case of the monk Channa?
Channa,
also Vakali, I think.
Yeah, it was Vakali, but also there was a monk Channa.
There were two monks, I think. I don't remember.
I remember in the case of Channa, the Buddha says, somebody comes to the Buddha, maybe it was Sariputta, and says, what was his...
No.
It was Channa.
Channa?
And also Bodhika.
Right.
Bodhika, Bodhika. Yes.
Godika was a little different because Godika was
it was
not yet. Godika was not yet an arhat.
Yes.
But he couldn't go further in his meditation. So then he made the decision to take his life. And then it's Mara comes to him and pleads with him to go on living.
Right.
And then Mara can't convince him to go on living. So then Mara goes to the Buddha and says, please, Bhante, your disciple Godika wants to take his life. Convince him to go on living. And then the Buddha says, that's how the noble ones practice. They are not attached to life, something like that.
Yeah. So it depends. It depends.
Maybe this question could be, discussed for hours. Maybe we should move on to the next question.
That's right. Yes, Bhante. Actually, we have at least 16 questions, but I don't think we can cover all the questions. So far we discussed only 2 questions. So next, I would like to invite Bhikkhu Dhamma from Niagara Falls, Canada, to ask his question from Bhante Bodhi.
Hello, Bhante.
Hello.
Namaste. Well, my question isn't controversial. I'm sorry. It's a fairly simple question, but it's a question that's dear to me. Something I'd like to hear about. We often think of how morality affects others. And how it affects our relationship with others. And the world around us, like our rebirth and our physical reality. So the question is, maybe if you can talk about and elaborate for the benefit of those of us who are practicing Buddhists, how ethics, how unethical behavior gets in the way of the development of concentration, and how ethical behavior is crucial in the development of samadhi.
So I think maybe we could take this question by going to like the final goal of the Buddhist meditative path, which is the destruction of the defilements, destruction of greed, hatred, delusion, the elimination of the asavas, or the anusayas, the underlying tendencies. Okay, so those defilements, asavas, underlying tendencies, manifest at different levels. So they manifest at one level in the mind by overriding the mind and causing mental disturbance, distress, dejection, agitation. And then they manifest in behavior and conduct. And so when we behave unethically, violating the basic principles of ethics, then we are reinforcing through our conduct those defilements of the mind, which have to be overcome even in the initial stages of samadhi in order to provide a base for the development of insight or wisdom. And so when one acts unethically, then one is reactivating or strengthening or reinforcing the defilements, which the Buddha says, he says that that these corruptions of the mind, which are detrimental to I don't remember the exact expression, detrimental to concentration and destructive to wisdom. Whereas when one behaves in an ethical way, then one is developing, arousing, strengthening, and reinforcing the wholesome qualities of mind, even if one is not formally practicing meditation, but just by consistently adhering to the principles of ethical behavior, one is putting away, at least suppressing, the unwholesome tendencies and strengthening the wholesome tendencies of mind, so that the tendency of the mind, or the disposition of the mind to enter into a state of concentration, becomes stronger, so that even without so much effort put into the practice, one might more easily enter into states of deep concentration and the arising of insight wisdom. And especially what happens as one undertakes a systematic or formal practice of meditation, then one's moral transgressions, even if one doesn't clearly remember them when one starts to engage in the practice, but the memory traces are there within the mind. And what tends to happen is that as the mind goes deeper into deeper levels of concentration, those memory traces of the transgressions come up or bubble up from the deep recesses of the mind into active consciousness. And then they cause kukucha, remorse, regret, vipatisara, remorse, and then that brings along udacha, the agitation of the mind, which prevents concentration and wisdom. Yeah, so that's a fairly straightforward question. With I hope that's a straightforward answer.
I think one reason why it's interesting is in relation to how it points out that ethics goes deeper than just precepts, because we often fixate on don't do this, don't do this. These are the rules that you have to keep, and yet that doesn't get to the heart of the matter in terms of how does keeping these rules lead directly to insight, and so or lead to clarity of mind, right?
Yeah, I think one finds that not simply like in the statement of the precepts itself, abstaining from the destruction of life, abstaining from stealing, and so on, but in the fuller account when the Buddha is expounding on especially the 10 courses of wholesome karma, then he'll also bring in the positive counterpart to the act of abstinence. So one abstains from the destruction of life, but then one dwells kindly and compassionate towards all living beings. One abstains from stealing, and then one dwells honestly, and so on. So it's the qualities of compassion, honesty, faithfulness to one's partner or celibacy, truthfulness, sobriety of mind, that those are the sort of positive, ethically rooted mental factors that contribute to the development of concentration and wisdom.
Bhante, what would you say is can you explain just briefly the aspect of Sila in the Eightfold Noble Path? Like when we talk about the actual attainment of liberation, only because I'm thinking of getting from precepts to there. Obviously, at the moment of enlightenment, it's not about keeping the precepts, right?
Yeah.
It's about something more mental, right? So what is the state of mind, the Sila that we're trying to cultivate to get there? Like talking about the Virati Cetasika and that sort of thing.
Yeah, there are different ways of looking at the Noble Eightfold Path, whether one is taking what we call a sutta perspective or the Abhidharma perspective. And I think from the sutta perspective, basically when the Buddha speaks about right speech, right action, right livelihood, he's pretty much speaking about observing right speech, right action, and right livelihood in the unfolding of our everyday life, rather than in terms, the way it's looked at in the Abhidhamma, as particular chaitasikas, which have the function of eradicating the tendency to wrong speech, wrong action, wrong livelihood, which is not to say that that doesn't occur, but I think the way I see the Eightfold Path, that there's the preparatory path, which is the path that one cultivates in one's everyday life by developing these 8 path factors. And it's when they come to their culmination, to the particular point of climax, that they then have the function of bringing the world transcending realization. And in that case, we could say that right speech, right action, right livelihood have the function of debilitating and ultimately eradicating the dispositions towards wrong speech, wrong action, wrong livelihood. But from a practical standpoint, I would say in cultivating the Noble Eightfold Path, one also has to bring in the positive counterparts of each of those abstinences.
I see.
That's the way I understand it.
Bhante Bodhi, may I ask a further follow-up question regarding wholesome and unwholesome action?
Yeah.
So often you hear people say things like inaction is karmically meaningless. But as I read in the suttas, the Buddha says that an unwholesome deed is either to do what should not be done or to not do what should be done. So that second one, not doing what should be done, seems to imply that inactivity under certain circumstances is also generating bad karma. What are your thoughts on this? So for example, if somebody is being mistreated and you have the opportunity to help them, but you just stand by and do nothing and watch as they're mistreated.
Yeah, even though it's not so clearly covered by any of like the courses of unwholesome action, but I would say sort of the general principle that one applies in determining what is the right thing to do under particular circumstances would be like the golden rule, like how would I want to be treated if I were in such and such a situation? So in a very like simple, concrete situation like you described, somebody is being mistreated and you are present and observing that. Like if you just turn away and don't take the action to correct the mistreatment of the person, how it works comically, I don't know, but I would say that certainly it would be not doing what should be done under those circumstances.
Bhante, let me ask some concern about you and also the other venerable monks. I think my question is coming in the second last or third last of the list, so I don't think I have time to ask you questions.
But maybe
I jump. I'm Bhante. So Bhante, it is very nice to have some nice questions from monks, and also your answers are brilliant. So I'm very thankful about it. So my concern is that if we find solutions to these very practical issues with only paryapti in the sasana, we might get a lot of confusion because just the knowledge about the Tripitaka and what the Buddha said is not adequate to find some solutions. Like in the previous question, I do not want you to go into that again about the euthanasia and that sort of thing. But one of the main practices we have is Vedananupassana in Satipatthana. So my concern is that if we, practice Vedananupassana up to the level the Buddha explained in Satipatthana, the perception of unpleasant feeling and also the fear of dying could be well managed. And that is from not the common sense, but from the teaching, we can get this idea that we can face the challenges. Because people are to, live with whatever they like So that the idea of lightness is always, talk about, and that is the way the world goes. And from that point of view, I guess dying would be a major issue. And also the dying is easy to me because the pain, the sorrow, lamentation we have about the unpleasant feeling before that is the major issue. That's why a lot of people sign their will and do this and so on. But if we are to practice Vedananupassana, particularly the mindfulness on unpleasant feeling, I guess we can manage a lot of things. That's why Pariyapti doesn't provide solutions to this problem. And Patipatti and Pativeda, those who actually reach to that level also die, like Channa, Godika, and also Vakkali. So they, of course, had that sort of understanding too. But at the same time, my concern is that if we, as monastic, let people know that you practice Vedananupassana, which means mindfulness on pleasant feeling. It is impermanent. And mindfulness on unpleasant feeling and neutral feeling. That makes a lot of sense. That is it is not a form of questions, Bhante, but it is my idea about,
It's certainly true that a person who practices the Satipatthanas and then has some experience with contemplation of feeling will be able to endure extreme painful feelings more successfully than somebody who has no experience in meditation at all. And in fact, there are some suttas. One, of course, is with the Natapindika, not the one where he dies, but an earlier one where he gets a very severe illness. And the other was a householder, Siri Vada, I think is his name, in the Satipatthana Samyutta, where he's extremely ill. He asked one of the monks to come, in one case Ananda, the other case Sariputta, and then they claim that they've practiced, that they're deeply grounded in the four foundations of mindfulness, and so they can endure the pain, and then they recover from the illness.
Okay,
but in dealing with question number 2, we weren't looking at the situation of a Buddhist practitioner, but what is the kind of ethical judgment we would form in regard to this practice in general, not taking the specific case of a Buddhist practitioner who has maybe the meditative skills to deal with the situation.
Thank you, Bhante. This was actually a very productive discussion, and we can go on and on. But since we have more questions, I would like to move on to next question from ethics to politics. So I would like to invite Bhante Suddhasu from New York to ask that question. That is the question from him.
Okay, thank you, Bhante.
Are you in New York or New Jersey now?
We're technically in New Jersey now.
Okay.
But I mean, New Jersey is basically an extension of New York. So
there are a lot of New Jerseyites that wouldn't agree with that.
Well,
just like sometimes Americans say, well, Canada is just an extension.
I wouldn't go that far. There's too many Canadians in the audience. But my question, so as I wrote it here, my question was that one thing I find surprising is how many people who identify as Buddhist are opposed to government policies that would alleviate widespread suffering, deprivation, and injustice. Things like universal free healthcare, racial justice measures, gender equality, welfare expansion, prison reform, tax reform, and so on. And so I find this really puzzling because to me, this is a natural expression of the Buddhist mind of compassion. And I hear such people saying things like Buddhism has nothing to do with politics, saying that monks should not talk about politics and that therefore I should not talk about these issues. So I just want to ask, what is your thoughts on applying Buddhist principles of compassion when talking about subjects which other people label as politics?
At first, it seems that if there are some of these self-described Buddhists, if they're opposed to governmental policies that would alleviate widespread suffering then they can't also say that monastics should not talk about politics. Well, because they are, if they say that Buddhism has nothing to do with politics, they in fact are getting involved in politics by opposing these policies, as if they're opposed to them. But if they take the standpoint that Buddhism, especially monastics, should not have any knowledge about politics or take any political positions, what I have to say, in my opinion, that monastics should not endorse particular candidates, should not go to political rallies, should not campaign on behalf of particular candidates. But at the same time, what I would say is that, like it or not, though politics can often be a field in which there's a strong craving for power and the desire of egocentric personalities to shine and get their hold on power. But politics is also the field where these great moral issues are being debated and decided. And so we have issues like systemic racism, the treatment of immigrants, climate change, healthcare, war, militarism, some of the issues you have here, racial justice, gender equality, and so on. Like, these are moral issues which are to be decided by political decisions. So what I would think would be a proper approach of Buddhists, even monastics, if this is their calling, their vocation, that they should become knowledgeable about the debates on these issues and should advocate for those positions which best exemplify the principle of compassion. But this is for particular monks who feel that calling or vocation. I don't want to say that all monks should become politically knowledgeable and political advocates, but I would say certainly that there should be some Buddhist monastics who do stand up and become advocates for more just and compassionate policies and programs and decisions. Like, one thing that I noticed years ago, this was when, before Donald Trump was before Donald Trump was inaugurated as president, but after he had won the election, there was a sort of consortium of religious leaders headed by Reverend William Barber, at that time from the Moral Mondays in North Carolina, bringing together, but Trump was appointing his cabinet secretaries, cabinet members, and appointing extremely right-wing members who are going to be on the side of injustice. And so there was a petition being promoted by William Barber and signed by 2,000 religious leaders and dignitaries. And I found that list of the signatories, and I did a search. I put it into a Word document. I did a search for Buddhists, didn't get anything. Then I did a search for Zen, and I got one hit. Maybe I searched for some other Buddhist, key Buddhist terms. Maybe I searched for Dhamma and Dharma, didn't get anything. There were 2 Taoists, for peace sake. I think, but one Buddhist, the Zen person who was someplace in Idaho or Montana, or maybe it was Minnesota, and no Hindus. And it struck me as rather disturbing that as Buddhists, we always speak about compassion, loving kindness, compassion, loving kindness. And here, this was it was a very beautifully written appeal asking the president to appoint to members of his cabinet people who will promote justice and compassion and fairness in society. And there were a lot of signatures from Christian leaders, Jewish leaders, Muslim leaders, but one Buddhist.
Well, Bhante, I'd like to connect this to my earlier question about the karma of inaction.
Yeah.
I'm actually not entirely sure that it really is appropriate for monks to avoid these questions. So, for example, there's a friend of mine, very nice monk, but he says the phrase, "I don't talk about politics." And so I ask questions like, well, what about if slavery was being discussed? If slavery was being discussed by politicians and they ask you, is slavery wholesome or unwholesome, what would you say? And his answer was, I don't talk about politics. And to me, that just seems like cultivating bad karma and trying to smear it over with a catchphrase. And also there's this commonly repeated statement that silence supports the oppressor. And this is inescapable. If unwholesome things are happening and we don't say anything in opposition, then we are implicitly supporting or at least allowing it. Another example is the rise of so-called far-right Buddhism. So white supremacists who find a refuge in Buddhism precisely because so many Buddhist monks won't talk about politics. But actually, I think that this is incredibly destructive. We're cultivating incredibly bad karma by not making clear statements on
Okay, but let me just take the case, okay, that there are some monks who have a calling to the forest, monastic life, the contemplative life, living deep in the forest and mountains. I know monks like this, Western monks in Sri Lanka. And so I'm not going to say to them that you should come out of your forest hermitage or your kuti deep in the forest and start speaking up on these political issues. Like that is their particular vocation to, pursue a purely contemplative life, seeking to gain, the final goal of the Buddha's teaching. So I say is that there should be, especially those maybe monks who are involved, interacting with society in a more active way, then would have the responsibility to speak up on these issues. But there are bound to be monks who have a calling to a renunciate life. And maybe we could say that through their practice of metta and karuna, suffusing it out upon the world, they're contributing at an invisible, imperceptible level towards upholding a more just society. Too often that use of loving kindness and compassion could be a cop-out from taking decisive action. But I think that I would have to respect the calling of those monks who feel drawn towards the more secluded, purely contemplative life and not feel that they should be obliged to step forward and speak up on these critical social and political issues.
Okay, so let us move to next question. Thank you, Venerable Suddasa, for asking that question. Thank you, Bhante, for that marvelous answer. And next question is going to Bhante Kusala from Detroit, Michigan. So, Venerable Kusalo, please ask your question for Bhante Bodhi.
So now is the story time. So this will perhaps be easier for Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi. I am really intrigued by your story of the starting of the hunger relief project, and particularly the story that Professor Halise just recently mentioned in his Pali class that I joined virtually from here, about your own experience of hunger when you went on Pindapata. And you saw there was, I think you can dig into the details of the story and that.
Yeah, but that story takes about 45 minutes to tell. Maybe I won't start from that point. But if you want to know how that Buddhist global relief began, okay, this was the year 2007. The Buddhist magazine Buddha Dharma had asked me to write every issue. They have an essay, I think they call it comment, a kind of editorial essay. And one of the things that was disturbing to me as I witnessed the way Buddhism was unfolding in the American scene is the way, this ties up a little bit with what Bhante Suddasa was just saying, the way so many Buddhists think that their practice, or they identify their practice almost solely and exclusively with their meditation practice. And there seemed to be too much indifference towards these great social, political, economic issues that confront the wider society. And this had been sort of simmering in the back of my mind for several years. And so when they asked me to write the editorial essay, then I wrote on that issue. And I didn't give the essay any title. I just called it comment, something like that, or commentary. But the editor gave it the title, A Challenge to Buddhists. And you could find that essay through the Buddhist Global Relief website in the background story of how BGR came into existence. So the essay was published in 2007, and some of my students read the journal, and they started to talk first amongst themselves about their need, that they felt the need to step up to the challenge presented in that essay. I said that if Buddhism is to fulfill its mission in the contemporary world, it has to take on a more active role in addressing the great, massive amounts of suffering that are facing millions upon millions of people around the world. And so we started some rounds of initial discussions, and then we decided to form a relief organization. Originally, we had the grandiose idea of addressing all of the problems of social deprivation and oppression facing people around the world. But we realized that was just too broad, too general. And so we needed to find a more specific point of focus. And so during my early days in Sri Lanka, as a monk in Sri Lanka, the country was undertaking some experiments, some economic experiments, which were not very successful. And it led to sort of intensified the poverty at the village level. And in the temple where I was living, it was quite a poor temple. And I didn't know how to go on Pintapata because it was not a widespread practice in Sri Lanka. And so for months upon months, the meals that I was receiving were really very inadequate, to the point that I felt my body actually starving from the need for nutrients. Not that one feels hunger in the stomach, but one actually feels that coming up from the cells of the body, that they're not getting the vitamins and minerals and other nutrients that they need. So based on that experience, when we needed a more specific point of focus, then I proposed that we address the problem of hunger and malnutrition. So we started with that, but then as we went on, we began to sort of dig in, what are the roots of hunger and malnutrition? And then two of the things that, through investigating the roots, that became clear, one is, well, that they're interrelated. One is the lack of educational opportunities for girls in many traditional cultures. And then the other is the subordinate status of women in many traditional cultures. So to address hunger and malnutrition, two things that we have to do is to enable girls to get better education and even to advance through their education to the college and university level. And the other is to give women the opportunity to start livelihood projects to support their families. And so that became the way in which Buddhist Global Relief established its mission.
Yes, Bhante, we are looking forward to having you in Toronto, Canada, to walk on the street in downtown Toronto.
But I think what you can do in Toronto, there are lots of Buddhists and Buddhist temples there. Once conditions become safe again, we can start having the walks again.
Yeah.
Then you can get all of these temples together and have a walk to feed the hungry there.
Yes, Bhante, we are just we had to do it with you. You are in the front.
Bhante, I was wondering how this year or even last year it happened, due to the pandemic thing.
Yeah, what we did instead of having walks, what we had were online programs promoting with speakers and short descriptive overviews of Buddhist Global Relief projects. And then we had some of our project partners give the presentations on the projects. And it turned out to be quite successful, even though we didn't have the walks, but it was quite successful.
When that would be available, I mean, for general audience to approach or reach out to anything or even to support?
Yeah, usually we have it. You're in Detroit, right?
Yes, Bhante.
Yeah, so I know that the people in Michigan, Detroit,
yes.
and Auburn.
Yeah, we used to do that every year.
Yeah, I know that, yeah. Usually it takes place around October, but in October, and sometimes for more southern states, it could extend maybe to the first week in November. But usually it's concentrated in November, late September to early November.
I see. Thank you.
Okay, Bhante, so let me, maybe this might be the last question. It will depend on the answer Bhante Bodhi is going to give.
Okay.
So I would like to invite Bhante Sankitya from Detroit to ask his question. And also today is Bhante Sankitya's birthday.
Oh, so we have to sing happy birthday to you.
Thank you, Bhante. Thank you.
He's the birthday month today.
Wonderful thing to receive the blessings of all the months. Thank you so much. So is it my time, Bhante, for the question?
Yes,
you can ask the question.
Yes, Bhante, this question came to me actually from many people, especially when we teach our lay audiences, from time to time. Many people ask this common question, the concepts or the teachings that we learn in the Dhamma as non-self and non-attachment. So how to cultivate these qualities in a lay life, as they are dealing with all these worldly matters, obligations, relationships, having children, having to work every day. How can they let go, and how can they still practice the Dhamma in everyday life? So what is your thoughts on that?
First, I would make a distinction between practicing the Dhamma and non-attachment. That to practice the Dhamma doesn't necessarily mean that one develops non-attachment in a very radical way. In fact, I don't recall offhand the Buddha teaching lay people that they should give primary emphasis to non-attachment, but rather that they should fulfill their responsibilities to their family and to their communities. But they can practice the Dhamma going beyond just the observance of Sila by using certain themes of contemplation to, let's say, to weaken attachment and to be able to deal with the vacillations, the fluctuations of fortune in everyday life without being shaken and disturbed by them. For example, some of the themes that we use regularly for reflection are like the 5 contemplations. I'm subject to old age. I haven't escaped old age. I'm subject to illness, subject to death, that I have to be at some point separated from everyone who is dear and beloved to myself, that I am the heir to my karma. Whatever deeds I do, good or bad, I will reap the results. So if you do reflections like this, then when one grows old or falls sick, one could do so gracefully without feeling dejected and miserable. When one is facing death, and we have to remember these days, death can take place. Well, at any time throughout history, death can take place at any time. But now with the COVID virus, and in this country, I don't know how it is in Canada, but so many of these brutal mass shootings take place. And that's what we see in the news is just the tip of the iceberg. But thousands and thousands of one-on-one shootings take place every day in this country. Sometimes quite irrational ones too. Somebody is angry and goes outside and just shoots the first person that he sees. So if you do the reflection on death, then when death comes, one could let go peacefully. And also the reflection on the 8 worldly winds, gain and loss, fame and obscurity, praise and blame, pleasure and pain. So if we reflect that how life in the world is subject to the 8 worldly winds, then we won't be shaken and disturbed by them. So those are some of the, meditative or contemplative themes. And even doing the reflections on the 3 characteristics, like all sankharas are impermanent, all sankharas are dukkha, unsatisfactory, all dharmas are anatta, non-self. If one, through repeated contemplation or reflection, one trains the mind to consider those themes, not just doing them mechanically, but really examining them, then one could live as a layperson, still fulfilling one's duties and still with a natural amount of attachment, but one could still be able to live peacefully without being driven compulsively to pursue pleasures and to escape from pain, to seek status and position and power and wealth, and being anxious about economic deprivation, loss, and so on.
Right.
Okay, so
Thank you.
we have 5 more minutes, and maybe this will be our last question, Bhante Bodhi. Yeah. So this is a question from England, from Venerable Chanda Bhikkhuni, but she is not here. But I would like to invite Aya Soma from New York to ask that question from Bhante Bodhi.
Hi, thank you so much, Venerable Saranapala, and thank you, Venerable Bodhi, for taking time to answer our questions. So Venerable Chanda was asking, the brutal military coup in Myanmar is being condemned by individual leaders and governments throughout the world. The Myanmar people are inspiring many through their courageous commitment to peaceful protest, even at the risk of their lives. However, a minority of people in Buddhist circles are stating that what the Myanmar people now experience is their karma. Some are even more specific and say it is their karma for complicity in the Rohingya genocide. How would you respond to this? For example, is there any concept of group karma in the suttas? And what is the right understanding of karma that leads to compassionate action? Thank you, Bhante.
Yeah, this is quite a big question. Let me not try to get into the theme of karma here, but just to speak about what is going on in Myanmar now, like this is one of the most disturbing events that's taking place, not only in the Buddhist world, but in the entire world today, that we had. It was a very imperfect government previously, but at least it could make some claim to democratic legitimacy, even though it was at fault for not, let's say, for condoning or for allowing the military attacks against the Rohingya to take place and drive close to 1 million to 800,000 of them out of the country to Bangladesh. But still, at least it had some claim to democratic legitimacy. But just was it 2 months ago, a little more than 2 months ago? The problem with that partly democratic constitution was that the military still had a major voice in the running of the government, and that at the beginning of February, they decided, for some reasons known to themselves, just to completely overthrow the democratic government and to imprison or to detain the leaders of the National League for Democracy and to take the government entirely into their own hands. And so the people rise up in protest peacefully, even now joining with the marginalized other ethnic groups in the hope of establishing a new constitution that would give scope, participation of people from all the different ethnic groups to join in the administration of the country. And now they're just being shot, peacefully protesting, sitting and protesting, and the military is just coming without any discrimination, indiscriminately shooting and killing. The last I heard, it was the middle of last week, more than 600 people, and then imprisoning thousands, rounding up thousands and imprisoning them. And, we can't, perhaps it's due to karma, perhaps not. And even if it's due to karma, karma is not a fixed force, but it operates only with the unfolding of conditions. So I don't really want to make any judgment in terms of karma. but rather that this is something that really that the world in some way has to address, and to help the people of Myanmar to depose the military leaders, to put them back into their place simply as commanders of the army, and allow the people to elect democratically, to elect a government that would truly represent them. How to do this is extremely difficult, but I know that there are groups in Thailand that are at least trying to funnel support, aid to the protesters in Myanmar. This is the International Network of Engaged Buddhists, which is based in Bangkok, but there's a group, a little organization in California run by my friend Alan Sinauki. It's called the Clear View Project, which is collecting funds in the United States from people in the US who wants to support the protesters. So if anybody wants to support them, then you can search on Google for Clear View Project, and there'll be instructions there on how to support the protesters in Myanmar. And also support through the Clear View Project also has another wing, which is providing support to the Rohingya people in Bangladesh.
Great, thank you so much, Bhante. And just a quick follow-up on that. So I guess in terms of like talking about the bad karma of the Myanmar people, I would say that a lot of times my impression is that people use karma as vipaka. So instead of
that is true.
Meaning action. So the actions that actually the Myanmar people are doing are of solidarity with one another, and the bad karma is actually made by the military. So isn't our duty as monastics to encourage people to focus on the bad karma that is currently perpetrated, instead of always somewhat highlighting the kind of arbitrary bad karma that we don't even know exactly. We can't really say what bad vipaka is currently happening for people, but we definitely can see for certain the bad karma.
Yeah, and I don't focus it so much on the fact that the military is creating bad karma. If I was speaking to them, but I don't have any connection with them, then I would say you are committed. You're committing bad actions which are creating bad karma. You'll have to reap the results at some future time. But just speaking sort of in a public forum where people might not be responsive to the idea of karma and vipaka, but what I would say is that this is virtually crime against humanity that they're committing. Grave violations of principles, basic principles of justice and the necessity for democratic rule in a country.
Okay, so I think time has come to end this discussion today. And Bhante Bodhi, we have 16 questions. We have covered only 7. So I'm just wondering, Bhante Bodhi, whether you would be compassionate enough to give us another chance to have such a wonderful, friendly discussion with you, Bhante Bodhi.
Well, I was having a kuti built in the forest someplace. When do you meet? How often do you meet?
It's a bi-weekly, Bhante.
Bi-weekly.
Yeah.
Okay, next week, you don't meet next week. Then the 24th, not possible for me.
Okay.
24th, not possible. Then what is 2 Saturdays after the 24th?
Okay. Okay, that will be wonderful.
Let me just take a look at the date to make sure that I don't.
15th.
It's May 8th.
May 15th?
Oh, it's 8th. I think it's 8th.
Yeah, it's 8th May.
Let me just get a calendar.
Okay, May 8th, Bhante.
May 8th should be possible for me.
Okay, Bhante. But please make a note, May 8th.
Okay, I'll put it in my Google Calendar.
Okay, Bhante.
You knew Venerable Piyadasi.
Yes.
From Vajrayana. Okay, I'll close with a little incident with Venerable Piyadasi, who is a popular preaching monk. Sri Lanka. So one time, this could have been the 1980s, early 1990s, I'd gone to Colombo, so I was staying in Vajrayana, which was the monastery of Venerable Piyadasi. And so when I was staying there, in the early evening, some man came and he was knocking on the door to Venerable Piyadasi's room. And I said, can I help you? And he said, I'm looking for Venerable Piyadasi. And then I told him, Venerable Piyadasi went out someplace to give a sermon. And the man said, but he was scheduled to give a sermon at my house tonight.
That's a good story, Bhante. Well,
yeah, so one wants to avoid those kind of.
Now we have good karma, Bhante, to have you on May 8th. That's for sure.
This is collective karma, definitely.
Yeah. So Bhante, today we are very grateful to you, and this was such a wonderful and amazing sutra discussion that we had. And we learned so much from you, and our audience also learned so much from you. And we will continue this discussion. We will continue with the rest of the questions we have. And of course, those friends who ask questions, those venerable monks and nuns who are yet to ask questions from you, they will have the chance next time. And also, Bhante, we would like to give you a special gift. And this is called the Noble Eightfold Path clock. And one of our devotees and students, Jenny Kim, read your book, The Noble Eightfold Path. Yeah. And so she was so delighted, and she said we should be mindful of that Noble Eightfold Path to Nirvana, 24 hours. So she came up with this clock, and she would like to mail it to you. So expect this clock.
Okay, actually that would be useful, because downstairs, in the downstairs hall here, I think we don't have a clock there.
Okay, so we will send this to you.
Often I think people want to send a clock. My initial thought was I really don't need one, but then I realized downstairs we don't have a clock, so it would be useful to have this.
So Bhante, our respect to you and our gratitude to you.
So thank you.
We learned so much. And so now I would like to invite Bhante Uparatana from Washington, D.C. to recite over the Patimokkha to finish this discussion.
Thank you, Venerable nuns, monks and nuns together, Dhamma discussion. Wish you all the best and long life and good health. Sabba papas akaranang kusalas upasampada sacitta pariyodapanang etam buddhana sasanang Khanti paramang tapotitikha Nibbanam paramang vadanti buddha Nahi pabbajito parupaghati Samano hoti parang vihetayanto Anupavado anupagato Patimokkecha sangvaro Matanyutacha bhattasming Pantancha sayanasanang Adiciteva ayogo Eta Santang Buddhana Sasanang.
So thank you so much, Bhante Pemaratana, for reciting this Ovada Patimokkha with such a beautiful voice. And this is, it feels like, reciting this Gatha, we feel like Buddha is with us. So Bhante Bodhi, we would like to wish you long life with good health. And we are going to see you again on May 8th. And until then, you have to live happily, peacefully with physical and mental health. May all the blessings of the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha be with you. And may all the blessings of the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha be with all the venerable monks and nuns who are here with us for this unique discussion. And also all the blessings of the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha be with all our friends who are watching us from, in YouTube and Facebook. So thank you and good night.
Okay, good night.